Hello, this is Jasmine, and I'm sorry for the voice. I'm still getting over being sick, but I am painting a little sugar cookie axolotl here. This is another one that's going with my previous axolotl drawing painting, and I thought I would do this one in kind of a like a tutorial style, because I have a tutorial on how to paint sugar cookies on my channel, but it's old, so I thought this would be like how to paint a creature as a sugar cookie creature. Hopefully it goes well. I've never done it before. And this is going to be a bit of a real-time video with some sped up portions, maybe a few jump cuts here and there. But to get started, you can do this with basically any kind of medium that you want that has the right color. I find that opaque mediums are going to work the best. I'm using gouache. These are my Winsor Newton gouache. I usually use these gouache, which are my Shinhan gouache, Shinhan designer gouache, and I love these. They're my favorite. But when I first did the sugar cookie tutorial, I used these Winsor Newton designers gouache. Oh, the Shinhan's probably not called designers. Anyways, I have Shinhan gouache and Winsor Newton gouache. And I also have these watercolors. These are Winsor Newton watercolors, and I may or may not use them, but I'm using the pan. This is a dagger brush. This is a Faux squirrel dagger brush by Dynasty. This came in a sketch box at some point, and I just really like the way it works with gouache specifically. I don't like this with watercolor, but I like it with gouache. I've got a water cup here. This is like a fancy plein air painting water cup, so it's got a lid. It's got it's got a lid with a rubber seal, and you can snap it on like a jar. And it has this area inside with holes that you scrub your brush against. And then you can take this out. I haven't washed it in a long time other than rinsing it out. So it looks a little gross, but that's just how paint cups tend to be. And last but not least, this is a just a mixed media sketchbook. I believe this is a Strathmore? Yes, this is just a Strathmore mixed media sketchbook. That being said, let's get into the painting. So to make this sugar cookie base, the reason I'm using my Winsor Newton gouache is because I love this color, yellow ochre, for a sugar cookie base. You don't need very much, a little bit, and then you're going to try not to drip on your painting as you're moving the water from over here to over here. And you're just going to get a fairly liberal amount of water mixed in with your gouache. Some people will say, well, but gouache is supposed to be used opaquely, that's why it's not watercolor. I like to build up my gouache, so I like to start transparent and then work with less and less water. So let's test this out. I'm going to test it out on this little sugar cookie here. That's pretty good, so you can see it's fairly transparent. This is a really nice base, and I'll finish filling in this cookie, and then we will move on to the axolotl. I'm keeping the mixture fairly wet. It seeps, a little bit of this pigment will like seep over here, and I'll use up the water and then have to mix up a little more and make sure it's wet. But the thing about the sugar cookie like this, which is really fun, is that you do not have to be careful and make sure your wash is flat and even, because cookies have all kinds of texture, and try not to get too many sharp edges at this point, but otherwise don't worry about it. It can be patchy. And I keep digging in, I keep dipping into my water and making sure that it stays very transparent at this point. I'm going to finish filling this axolotl in time lapse. Okay, back to real time. So I also realized that I forgot to lighten the sketch. Normally I would lighten the sketch before I do this, but it should be okay because gouache is opaque. And you'll see that it is very patchy. And yeah, even with the glare you can see a little bit. And that's perfectly fine. We also, at this point, don't have to wait for it to dry. Mediums like gouache and watercolor, you often want to wait for it to dry entirely before you start the next layer, or to work in wet on wet, like really quickly. However, because of the patchy textured nature of a cookie, you do not have to worry about either of those things. So what I'm doing is I'm mixing a little more of the ochre into my water portion here. I'm like just making the mixture a little thicker, and I'm going to go, or I'm going to decide my light source, right? I think it's going to be from straight on, so there'll be shadows all around, but maybe a little bit from the edge, maybe have a harsher edge down here. So I'm going to start with this area of the tail. Alright, so I need a little bit more water because this is a little more opaque than I want, but if that happens, it's fine. Just dab off your, I've got a paper towel over here. Just dab off the excess paint and just kind of scrape it like that, and it'll thin it out. Do a touch of water, and I'm just kind of darkening any areas where there's a crease or an edge, and I'm gonna pull that out, and I'm just gonna kind of like tap it a little bit. I'm gonna twist my brush as I'm tapping to make this kind of splotchy texture. And a lot of it is going to be a little bit intuitive. Once you get the hang of it, you'll realize exactly how much water to use. You don't want pools of water, but you do want the page to be well saturated, or like your brush to be well saturated. And you don't want to be dry brushing at this point. Although dry brushing will be a technique that we use. We're kind of using it here. So it's a little more wet here in these creases. And as we pull the paint out and we're tapping with our brush, the brush is getting drier and drier. And that's creating this nice dry brush kind of texture. Again, we've got a little bit of a light source coming from here, so I'm going to leave it a little lighter. Make sure our mixture is exactly the opacity that we want. And I'm going to go in here kind of like it's a real 3D creature. We've got a few little wrinkles and overlapping areas. I actually like the way it looks when the edges dry just a little bit too. Okay, now that my brush is getting a little less saturated, I'm going to start tapping it out. And you can make patches. It doesn't all have to be uniform. In fact, it probably shouldn't all be uniform. And you can leave some of these edges not entirely blended out. And we're just kind of trying to create the 3D form with the little splotches. So because this is a 3D form and we have light coming from here, I'm going to focus on putting some speckles here. We're going to put texture up in the light source area, but then we're going to tap a little harder down here, and it's going to make like a deeper shadow. Same thing here. I've gotten quite a bit of water here, as you'll see, so I'm moving on to another area. I'm gonna tap my brush a little bit, and once my brush starts to dry out a little bit, like this, my brush is starting to dry out, I'm gonna move back in here and the brush will pick up some of that water, and I can spread it around a little more. Okay, I think for the rest of this tapping, I'm going to go into time lapse real quick. Okay, so I have finished up all of this texture, and I have also let it dry completely. If you wonder how to tell if a piece is dried, usually you can tilt it a little bit, and if it's still got a little bit of a sheen or shine for gouache or watercolor, then that means it's still a little bit wet. It's not imperative that there's no dampness at all for this next step, but I like to let it dry in between. Also, I get to take a break when I do that. So I'm going to build up the shadows on this guy using still entirely one color. I'm still using just yellow ochre. And I'm going to get the very edge. Like so. It's going to be a really thin stripe. A really thin shadow, because we're going for that like edge of the cookie look. And then I'm also going to, on the inside here, add a stripe here, but I'm going to do so very sparingly on this side. So the shadows are going to be, say, when it turns like that, maybe the tip of the tail. Again, we've got like this curve that goes in, so maybe we'll put a little bit of shadow there, and just keeping in mind your light source. And we've got a thicker mixture this time. Alright, so for this area right here, it gets a little more complicated. So this is in the background. So I'm gonna do a little bit of a tapping motion, and I'm still gonna give it the edge, but I'm going to make sure that it's much more darkness here. And then we're still going to put an edge here. Now that our outline is there, I'm going to go in with a damp brush, and it doesn't matter that this hasn't completely dried, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the edge and I'm just going to blur it and tap it. I want to keep a little bit of the harshness of the edge, but I also want to soften it. I might even go in with a little bit of our color here. And we're just softening the edge, but keeping it so that it's obvious that it's a line, but it's not quite as in your face. And we're gonna do that with all of our shadow lines. As you can see, it's starting to give it a bit of a 3D quality. I'm also going to darken up right here where the cookie meets, because I want this harsh shadow along the tail, but the tail is also raised. It's gonna cast a little bit of a shadow onto this part. Okay, so we have a lot of texture now. I'm going to get some more, same color. We're just building up on this color. And what I'm going to do now with a fairly light wash is add larger patches. This part's a little nerve-wracking, but you need larger areas, particularly in the shadows, but also just all over to make a splotchy cookie kind of look. These can be a little bit harsher lines. They don't have to be quite as soft. And it will also soften out the texture underneath. And if something just looks a little too harsh, you just soften it out. We do need a few harsh lines though. I find that an artwork will look best if it has a mix of soft organic edges as well as sharp edges. So for example, this right here, this is a soft organic blend. A lot of these dots are, but then here we have a sharp line right here. I am intentionally leaving the eye blank because I'm gonna make it like a candy kind of colored eye. Let's give this time to dry now. It's looking pretty good. Yeah. We're finally on to the super fun part that brings this from like a shortbread cookie kind of look to a sugar cookie look, and that is the sprinkles. I like to use just 3 different colors for these because I'm going for the Christmas cookie kind of look, holiday cookie. So I go with a yellow, a green, and a red. I liked these ones a lot when I used them before. So this is Spectrum Red. This is a Permanent Yellow Deep. And we have a permanent green middle. And I really like these colors a lot. I'm gonna put just a little dab of them over here because it's not going to take a lot. So I'm gonna get my brush wet and get a little bit of this color onto it. And we're gonna be really careful and use just the very, very tip. This is one reason why I really enjoyed the dagger brush. And I think I want it back here. So the way people shake sprinkles on, there's going to be one main spot where most of the sprinkles land. And I'm going to make that here, and it's going to be kind of like pointillism, a little denser. And then it's going to spread out like so, kind of like a firework or something like that. And they're uneven, so you know they'll spread out kind of all over. If there was a shake of sprinkles here, and I know it doesn't look quite right yet, but trust me, it will. Keep going. And then our brush will eventually start to lose most of the paint. At the moment, I'm noticing it's taking quite a bit, so I'm going to take it. I'm going to dab my excess paint off, because what I want to do now is a dry brush technique. I'm going to zoom in a little so that you can see what I'm talking about. Now that I'm tapping, it's a lot lighter. And I'm going to go back into this middle part, and it's slightly dried. So I'm just going to push my brush in a little bit harder, and you'll see that it's making it look like some of these sprinkles have melted. And I'm going to start pressing a little harder. I'm twisting my brush as I do it to make it not uniform. And I keep going back a little bit to that center area. And as you can see, it looks like we've got melted sprinkles now. My brush is slightly wetter now because I went back in, and you can see that that makes a larger patch. And once it starts to dry out, it'll make these fine little dots. And one of the things that makes this the most effective is the fact that it's pretty solid here and then spreads out. And you can add a couple of these next to each other and it'll look like the shaker got shaken a couple times. So for example, I might put another one here, and I'm going to speed this up so that it's not too boring or repetitive. And pretty soon we will have a completed sugar cookie axolotl. I like to take a little bit of the color and sometimes add touches to the edges that look like the sprinkles have maybe melted underneath the cookie. And I think this is good with the green. I don't want to overdo it. And I'm going to go in with another color, and as you'll see, it's pretty much the exact same technique. I think I want the face to be yellow. So I'm going to go in with red next and work my way to the face. One of my favorite things to do is to add a stray sprinkle or two of a different color. Like they just accidentally got a little bit elsewhere. If you're not 100% satisfied with your sprinkles, the density, you can always either lighten them with a touch of water and it make them a little more transparent, or you can go in and add a few more dark sprinkles. That's what I'm doing right here. I felt like some of these areas needed some more of the dark, less melted sprinkles. And that's essentially what it is. The darker the sprinkles, the less melted they are. I also feel like there just needs to be a little more color, so I'm going to dab into my green and just add a bit more blotchy color. I want it to be nice and colorful, but I do want that cookie base to be showing through. And I'm going to let this dry before I go in and do the same kind of touch-ups with the red. I'd like to put a little bit of red in the face, maybe a touch more here and there. So I'm going to go around the edges of the little frills, almost like the candy has melted into the cracks or something like that. Basically just make them pop a little bit more because they were getting a little lost. And I'm not going to spread it too much up into the frills because, again, I want it to make them stand out. And if I spread it too much, then it will do the opposite. It'll make it all blend in again. I'm going to do these final touch-ups and then we will be on to the absolute final details, which are so fun. They really bring it together. Also, this eye is turning into like a little candy eye. There's only two things left to do, and that requires white and black. The first thing we're going to do is use some white. I like to use the Shinhan gouache for white because it's just much higher quality. We're going to add in the highlights, but we want to be really sparing with the highlights. We also want to be fairly opaque. So I wetted my brush, but I didn't soak it. And I'm not diluting the paint at all. We got a little bit on our brush, and basically the highlights will be where the sugar sprinkles are the most dense, because where they're dense, the light's gonna, they're not gonna be like melted, and the light is gonna catch them. And we want to be mostly on the side with the light source, maybe a little bit along here or anywhere you see a singular sprinkle that's nice and dark. Basically anywhere the sprinkles are dark. you might have a few highlights. Make sure you keep your brush pointy. If you were using a different brush until this point, you might want to switch to a sharper pointed brush. And we're just going to dab on a few highlights, nothing intense. I'm going to add a few little highlights along these edges where we've got some dense sprinkles. If you do make your highlights a little too intense or a little too uniform or something, you can always use a little bit of water to blend them out. I do like to find individual sprinkles and add little highlights. We've now finished with the highlights. As you can see, they're very sparse, and I'm going to use a touch of black. You can do this with another color. I love Payne's Gray, so I think Payne's Gray would work really well. And we're going to dilute it a lot. Really, really, really pale color. It's mixed a little bit with this brown color on my palette, but that doesn't really matter. It'll just make it a little bit warm toned. And then the side that our light source is not coming from, so remember our light source is coming from up here, we're just going to go and we're going to paint a really, really faint shadow. I don't like to make the shadow very harsh. It's going to blend some of these colors, as you can see the green, and I think that that's a really neat effect. And we're going to go all the way around the shadow side. This will just make our little sugar cookie axolotl pop off of the page really nicely, like he's sitting on a cookie sheet. I'm actually going to mix the black with a little bit of the cookie base color, and I'm going to go in with some actual shadows on the cookie itself. I don't normally do this with my flat cookies because it's not necessary, but I would like to make the little frills stand out a little better. When I'm doing flat cookies like this, I don't normally put any kind of line art in, but I want this to be consistent with my other artworks in the series, so I'm using this pale gray LePen pen, and I'm just gonna darken up some of the points. If you're interested in more breakdowns of how I work and seeing more real-time processes, I do have a Twitch account that I stream on, and I like to give helpful tips when I am streaming. Clean up the edges a little bit and your cookie critter is done. If you guys followed along at all, feel free to tag me. I'm Jasmine Zelmer on Instagram and most platforms. I'm not super active on TikTok or Twitter or anything like that, but Instagram I am the most active on. Now let's finish up the little bits and bobs. So that is it for this tutorial. I hope you guys really enjoyed it, and thanks for stopping by.